IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Sachin Kalbag. I'm Senior Fellow at Takshashila Institution. In the third week of June 2023, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi embarked on a 3-day state visit to the United States. He was also invited to address the joint session of the US Congress, the first Indian Prime Minister to be accorded such an honor to be done twice. The visit yielded key agreements in defense ties, partnerships in technology, and of course, India's growing role in the Indo-Pacific. It also sent a strong message to China about the growing friendship between India and the US, something that President Joe Biden reiterated in his Twitter post on June 26th, when he said that the friendship between the US and India is amongst the most consequential in the world, and it's stronger, closer, and more dynamic than ever. Prime Minister Modi responded on Twitter saying that the friendship between India and the US is a force for global good. He said, I fully agree with you, Joe Biden, that the friendship between our countries is a force for global good. He said, it will make our planet a better and more sustainable. The ground covered in my recent visit will strengthen our bond even more, he said, end quote. Today, I have with me Yusuf, Unjhawala, a scholar at Takshashila, who also has been studying the US-India relationship and its strategic import and ramifications, not only for the region, but for the entire world. Modi's visit was perhaps the first bilateral event between the two countries where technology became the centerpiece of both American and Indian foreign policy objectives. Yusuf, I want to start today's podcast by asking you, what are your key takeaways from the Modi visit, and do they fulfill the expectations that strategic analysts such as you have been asking for from the relationship for many years?
Hey, Sachin, good to be back with you. Yeah, I think the visit was a grand success. All the hype that was built up before the Modi's visit actually became true in terms of the deliverables, or in terms of, you can gauge it from all the optics, the symbolism of the pomp and pageantry, and most importantly, the substance in which was seen through the very comprehensive joint statement that the two countries issued, and also Modi's address to the US Congress. So I think what Modi set out to do, or both the countries set out to do, was achieved, which was to take the relationship several notches higher and, show the world that this relationship is of consequences to them and to the world, and which is what is reflecting the statement where they keep saying that this is the most consequential ties, this is the defining partnership of the century. All this was played out during the visit.
Do you want to situate the visit in the context of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, Russia, in between China and the US in terms of technology? It's become a geopolitical minefield, the whole tech issue between China and the United States. The Quad has been discussing technology as one of its main points on the agenda. There has been the CHIPS Act in the US, which was passed recently, and Joe Biden, as president, signed on it and converted that into law, which means that American companies will get enough and more subsidies for creating and promoting technology that China was dominant so far. So in all this, to place the visit in this context, how would you do that? One. Two, do you think that because technology was the centerpiece of the visit and the centerpiece of foreign policy between US and India for this particular state visit, where do you see this and how do you see this playing out, not only in the short term, maybe in the next couple of years, but also in the long term, over the next 2 or 3 decades?
I think I'll answer the second one first. The relationship was projected as a defining partnership of the century, right? So you're looking at the long term. You're not looking at short term. Both the countries have decided to invest in each other in this relationship. That is very clear. One of the phrases used was, which is reflected in the joint statement. It's there in the joint statement. It says, it's no corner of human enterprise is untouched by the partnership between our two great countries, which spans the seas to the stars. These are the terms used, to show the very broad scope of the relationship and what we can achieve together. So yes, there are no limits now with the geopolitical contest heating up. India obviously is positioning itself to maximize its own interests, and it's investing in the US relationship so that it can gain back in all the areas that we are lacking: technology investments, technology transfer. And in return, we want our people to go over there and study in those universities over there and get jobs over there. So all these things are, looking at the long term. Nothing is for the short term. And to go back to your first question, which also addresses the second question. You asked about where do you place this with the Ukraine conflict. And also, if you remember, there are a lot of articles which came out just before the visit about India's role in the Indo-Pacific and specifically over Taiwan. I think what was shown over here is that any differences between the two countries will be addressed in a manner which does not hurt the larger ties. So if you have any differences, it will be addressed, but the larger ties will be worked on. We are going to invest in this relationship so that there is benefit for both countries, and both countries define their relationship as the global good. It's just not for themselves. So this is how we see the whole relationship moving.
Recently, you had published a paper where you had debunked so many of the opposition that came from from US analysts or Indian analysts on the US-India relationship. And you have been saying consistently over the last many years that India should align itself with the US, not only for itself, but also for, to enhance democracy, to enhance, global ties, where you see that the non-aligned movement is slowly losing its relevance. And in that sense, India's alignment with the US, creates a greater relationship, not only between the two countries, but also as a counterweight to China's dominance in the region and, of course, in the globe. Do you think that this visit kind of addressed all those issues?
I think, yes, the strategic embrace, it's gotten very much tighter now. We don't like the word alliance, so use partnership if you may. I mean, when I talked about, closer alignment, it's not in military context at all. I mean, I'm not the one who wants to go and fight someone else's wars, even if it's the US's war. So unless it's serving our purpose or it suits our national interest to get involved, that would be a call taken when any such eventuality happens. But my alignment was more about, it is clear that there is a divide now, right? There is the US on one side, there is China on the other side. And for India, it's a no-brainer as to which way we have to go. I mean, China is our rival. It does not want our rise. It has been boxing us around in our own region by using Pakistan. It gave it nuclear weapons. It even supports Pakistani terrorism, as you see in its various, it moves in the UN, where it is blocking any kind of sanctions on Pakistani terrorists. So it has supplied weapons to Pakistan. It supplied weapons to some of the other, these terrorist organizations which are active in India. And it has tried to, create bases all over, the place, which we call string of pearls. This is what China has been doing. There is no way that, China is going to have a normal relationship with us. It wants to dominate Asia and then dominate the world. And it cannot, see India as a rival to it. It would want India to be, accept China as the superpower and behave accordingly, which is reflecting in some of their statements in the media, in their articles. It's just like India should, know its OCAT, so to speak, right? That is what they keep trying to project to India. Obviously, we are a too proud of country. We are a too big a country to accept anything of that sort. We do require, help from other countries so that we can develop ourselves. And that help is going to come from the Western world, led by the US. And it's a no-brainer for us to, be closely aligned with the US. And that is what we are seeing now, right? The kind of trust that has developed. You are talking about creating standards for the future in future technologies. We want to work together in future technologies, be it quantum systems, artificial intelligence, 6G technologies, and a whole bunch, open RAN, and all kinds of things. So, we are deeply working with the US, and it is keeping a long term in mind. It's not just 1, 2, 5, 10 years. This is for the long term. So this is what we are seeing. And one more thing about the trust factor. I mean, one of the things that we saw in the joint statement was the US has decided to work with India to service its warship, repair its warships, which is serving on the front line. So if there's any certain breakdown or any certain kind of contingency which requires some work, it can be done in India. Now, US weapon systems coming to India for repair, this shows that there is a great deal of trust between the two countries. The US trusts India, India trusts the US. It's a good learning experience for us. We'll be able to get access to their advanced warships and also make money from it. But the underlying factor is the trust between the two countries, which has shown from this entire trip.
One of the points that you had raised in your paper recently, which is now available on Takshashila's website, is how various skeptics had pointed out that they feel that the American relationship with India will be a transactional relationship and an opportunistic one. There are still those skeptics who say that America wants to, come in, hand in glove with India, primarily because it wants to oppose China, and that it has no great, interest in propping up India at the present moment. And the moment India serves America's purpose, it will abandon the relationship. Is that what, because you have already addressed this in your paper, I just want to, go back to that one particular point and see and get an idea from you whether those skeptics have been answered to a great extent by this visit, because one of the joint statement that was made by US and India, and you've pointed out the important points in the joint statement, and secondly, because technology transfer and technology was a centerpiece of the visit this time, whether it is ISET, which is the initiative for critical and emerging technologies, whether it was Micron setting up a fab point, a factory in India, whether it was the drones agreement, whether it is the agreement between NASA and ISRO to set up an international space station. So all of these point towards not a tactical relationship, but a strategic relationship. So in that sense, do you think those skeptics have been answered?
Yes, of course. I mean, skeptics will still remain skeptics, but I think a lot of those questions have been answered. And you just talked about NASA, right? India's first astronaut went on a Soviet spacecraft, Rakesh Sharma, right? And that was in the previous century when India was, we considered the Soviets as our best friends and allies or partners. Cut to this century, the first Indian to go into space in this century is going to be on an American craft to the International Space Station. And the US is also going to help India with its own manned program. So there is going to be training of Indian astronauts. And Americans have vast experience in space flights and manned space flights. So we'll obviously gain a lot from them. But the thing is, the symbolism of it, right? In the last century, it kind of symbolized India-Soviet friendship. And now it's Indo-US friendship. And the Americans are trying to, also show that they mean business, they mean good for India. I mean, they have always said they want India's rise, they support India's rise. And it's not a transactional relationship. I mean, transactional relationship is something that you would probably see India doing with Russia today. You just buy some weapons, you buy oil, and you're done with. I mean, what else is there in that relationship? So that is transactionalism. Here we're trying to develop a very deep bond, and which is also coming from the deep people-to-people connect that we have. 4 million of our people living over there. PM Modi referred to that in his speech, where there's so many in the House, in the US Congress, that come from Indian origin. So all this is driving. It's just not transactionalism obviously is there within a larger relationship where you buy, sell stuff, and all that happens. But some of the other things, like getting people to invest in India, PM said, the governments have worked it out. Now it's up to the businesses to work together. So they have, kind of laid the larger stage, and it's up to all the businesses, the academics, the students, the technicians, whoever, to work to maximize the gains from this relationship. So it's not transactional per se. Obviously, a little bit of, any relationship has transaction, whereas buy and sell, that is transaction. But the largest strategic embrace is very clearly visible.
You brought out an important point. I think when you mentioned academics and students and business people, immigration was one of the key points of discussion. And even when the Indian diaspora went and met Prime Minister Modi, when they had representations made to the American administration, the two things that stood out in their presentations were the H-1B visa and the green cards. Now, India, because of the quotas and the allotments and the limited allotments every year, Indians seem to be on the losing track for many, many years. So much so that the green card backlog has increased so much that to get to your your green card. Perhaps if you're going to US now, it'll probably take about 100 years. So that is the kind of backlog you have at present. But given the work that the Indian American politicians are doing there, for example, Shri Thanedar, who's a Democrat from Michigan, he has introduced a bill to clear the green card backlog. Hopefully, with all these political tools at their disposal, America has shown some kind of keen interest in reducing the backlog. One, two, to get more and more people to come to America to build on the technology that they've already got, because we know that we've got skill set here. We've got very highly trained engineers who can go there and work. And I think the current immigration system is kind of restrictive to the extent that the Americans are not getting the kind of talent they want. With your reading of the Modi visit and the talks that he's had with Biden and with Kamala Harris, do you think that these issues will be addressed, and how important they are in terms of achieving what ISET, which is the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies, is going to achieve?
Yeah, I don't think we have, first of all, been neutral on the Ukraine war. We have told repeatedly that we want dialogue and diplomacy. The PM has said this is not an era of war. And he very recently said he told directly to the Putin himself. I mean, he said this in the US that, he's not for war. And he's always talked about the impact of war on India and the global South. And we have been projecting ourselves as the voice of the global South. So we are not neutral on that. So secondly, Russia, I think, understands the transactionalism that is there between our two countries. And I think it's kind of okay with that, where it's selling weapons to us. And now it's oil, which, has just, the sales have shot up. I think it's over $40 billion now. So they get that part. India also knows that Russia is very heavily dependent on China now, given its own weaknesses. But it is also a kind of an unnatural alliance because the two countries have a past. China claims a lot of areas that the Russians hold. I mean, territorial claims, although the boundary has been settled. But, with China, there's nothing which is settled, and those claims will come up. So Russia wants India to be there as its friend, as its partner. We call our partnership as a, privileged strategic partnership, although there have been strains for a long time. You asked about the spares. I mean, that part is already a problem for us ever since this war started. Russia is not able to service our request. The S-400 that India has ordered has been delayed. Our armed forces are struggling with spares. And this is not going to end anytime soon because the Russian losses in Ukraine have been severe. They are even using, decades-old tanks now, which are out of the service ages ago. So they are going to prioritize their own armed forces before they supply to anybody else. And they have limited capacity. And with all the sanctions, denial of access to advanced machining technologies, machinery and stuff like that. So they are going to find it, even electronics, they're going to find it very difficult to, churn out weapon systems, spares and everything. And this is going to be a challenge for us. And that's the reason why we're looking at this whole Atmanirbhar thing, trying to speed up the Atmanirbhar thing. You develop the spares for the Russian equipment at home, and also any new equipment that we buy here on is going to be largely made in India. And whatever else that we cannot make will be probably sourced from the West, France or, the US.
Yeah, true. On that note, we'll take a quick break, Yusuf. On the other side of the break, I want to bring up the issue of defense ties between the two countries. In your paper as well, you've mentioned how the Americans are already giving us real-time real-time information about Chinese movements, of Pakistani movements. And that is a practical thing. But, going forward, what are the strategic things that the two countries want to achieve with defense ties? On the other side of the break. Welcome back to Takshashila's All Things Policy podcast. With me is Yusuf Unjhawala, a scholar at Takshashila Institution. Yusuf, before we went on the break, we were talking about immigration, we were talking about tech transfer, we were talking about technology as the centerpiece of our foreign policy. Now, I want to bring about, bring to the conversation a topic that you have deep interest in and you have studied very deeply: the defense ties between the US and India. Over the last decade or so, the ties between the US and India have not only improved, but also have become more of a collaborative nature. Do you think that this Modi visit, one, what are the key takeaways specifically in defense? One. Two, what are the things that have been achieved that will create a little bit of a skeptical minds in the Chinese administration if they ever wanted to go on any kind of adventure in the Himalayas?
I think it's going to be economics, trade, future technologies that we're talking about. That's quantum, artificial intelligence, and the likes. Those kinds of things. Semiconductors. We are targeting American investments in India in the semiconductor fields, advanced electronics. So all this, defense ties will be there in its place, as we call it, the pillar of our relationship. But it's going to be just one pillar. I think many of the other pillars of this building that we're going to erect now is going to be a lot of this trade and technology stuff. And that is what is going to guide this relationship forward, or should guide this relationship forward. Otherwise, if it's just limited to defense, then, it can just very quickly, break apart, because then it just very narrowly focused on one aspect, which should not be the case. For us to realize our ties, the full potential of our ties, we have to, come up with all kinds of innovative methods to, enhance our trade and investments, technology sharing and things like that.
One of the things that could emerge from this is obviously Russian, disgruntlement. Can they, because our technology relied heavily on Russian imports earlier, do you think that the spare parts issue could become a thorny one between the two countries going forward? And using the old technology that we have with Russia, will that become a stumbling block, so to speak, in the going forward of the defense ties between the two countries, that is US and India?
It should, because even though the trade has doubled in the last 8 or 9 years, it's not good enough, frankly. That's the reason why we want to speed it up. And one of the outcome of this visit, and which I think has not gained much attention, is India deciding to unilaterally withdraw punitive tariffs on 28 American products without any reciprocity. And this was after Trump had imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. India had taken these retaliatory steps. So we decided to, withdraw those tariffs. And not only that, the two countries have decided to close their disputes at the WTO. About 6 of those which are running at the WTO, we have decided to withdraw those. So very clearly, we are now focusing on enhancing our trade ties. And India generally is very difficult when it comes to trade negotiations, and we just don't see it too easily. Imagine, removing unilaterally 28 American products out of a tariff list. So that's an indication that we are now looking to enhance our ties, trade ties significantly. And I think it should double far quicker now. I think we are trying to get to $500 billion very soon. I think we should be able to achieve that.
With Elon Musk saying that he wants to come to India and look at potential investments, it's kind of symbolic, isn't it? When the world's richest person says that he met Prime Minister Modi, and it was the interaction between the two that kind of decided, or rather tilted the whole thing in the favor of Elon Musk thinking of investing now in India, because he had practically given up, given India's high tariffs when it comes to electric vehicles or just automobile companies coming into India. You think that's a symbolic thing and it augurs well for trade between India and the US?
With Elon Musk, you can't say anything. He can say anything. So I don't know if that is symbolic, but I think what has happened is, in the last few years, I think Apple has invested and has decided to grow big on India. It has even asked some of its partners to prioritize their investment in India in their supply chain. Recently, we heard Google Pixel wants to do that, follow Apple, and get some of the manufacturing done in India. So these are the things which shows that India is seen by these big companies as part of their de-risking strategy, right? So I don't think I would base everything on what Elon Musk said, but I think a lot of other things that are happening. Micron is going to invest in India, although it is going to be with a lot of incentive from our side. But obviously, we need to give them incentives so that they come to India. Otherwise, they have other places to go to. And everybody's trying to give incentives to all these countries, including the US themselves, trying to pull their own companies come and invest in the US. So I think there are a lot of other things that have been happening, and I think we will see results going forward. A lot of work still remains to be done from our side. Just today, our colleagues Pranay and Anupam came out with a piece where they said, India has to reduce tariffs on electronics. Otherwise, we will not be competitive on the global scale in this field. So there are a lot of work to be done from our side. It's just not going to be at, you can have all the bonhomie, the strategic ties, everything, but ultimately the business part will happen only when the business and policies and the environment is conducive. So there is work to be done from our side. But overall, I think trade is going to be the driving factor of these relations, not just defense.
You think that the government role in promoting trade is, doesn't stop at one Modi visit, does it? I mean, because there'll have to be Piyush Goyal's ministry, Rajiv Chandrasekhar's ministry, all these ministries collaborating, Nirmala Sitharaman's ministry. So all of these ministries collaborating and, making those incentives happen, or making that ecosystem be created in India so that American investments go full steam ahead.
I think Modi said it best it was, I think, at a meeting of the business leaders, where he said, the governments have done their job. It's now up to the businesses to, take it up from there. He's partly true. So at the larger level, the kind of trust has been created. The Americans have been talking of friendshoring. We are projecting ourselves as your best friend. Come and, invest in India. But after that, it's the ministries which have to actually create the right regulatory framework in terms of attracting investments. Obviously tariffs is a big factor. How are we going to address that? So rather than visits, I mean, that will obviously be important, and you will go and visit the US and attract and talk to the big companies over there. But what matters is what happens at home. How are you going to make it easy for all these big companies to come and invest in India and profit from here? Ultimately, they're seeking profits. They're not going to be in India for any reasons beyond profit. Simple.
Yeah.
That's how businesses work.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, we've run out of time. Yusuf, thank you very much for the overview of not only Modi's visit, but the strategic relationship and the importance of the two countries going forward. Thank you once again. I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.